with us. Today we're going to be tackling something that might sound a little bit intimidating at first. Trusts.
Oh, yeah.
Trusts.
Trusts are great.
They sound like, they're only for millionaires.
Yeah.
Big estates and all
Yeah,
that.
right.
But you know what? Understanding even the basics of trusts can be surprisingly useful for anyone,
Absolutely.
not just the super wealthy.
For sure. Yeah, we're going to break this whole complex world down today using a law school handout we found
Okay.
on the formation of trusts.
Okay.
So this is kind of like getting a sneak peek
Okay.
behind the curtain,
Yeah,
of how these legal arrangements, how they're actually created.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, first things first.
Yeah.
What is a trust? I mean, we hear the word right,
Right.
but can you give us just a simple definition?
Yeah, absolutely. A trust is basically a legal agreement where one person, and they're called the trustee, manages property or assets for the benefit of someone else, and we call them the beneficiary.
Okay.
So it's kind of like having a designated driver
I like that.
for your valuables.
Designated driver for your valuables. So it's not just about having a lot of money.
Right.
It's about having a plan for how that money or any valuable asset
Right.
really is managed and used.
Yeah, exactly. And, speaking of plans, our handout dives into the different ways you can actually create a trust.
Okay.
And it might surprise you to learn that there are a few different approaches.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay.
What's the first way?
All right. The simplest method is what's called an outright gift.
Okay.
So imagine you have this vintage record collection.
Mhm.
You want to give it to your niece, right?
Okay.
An outright gift would be simply handing it over to her. No strings attached.
Okay. That makes sense. It's very straightforward, direct.
Yeah.
But something tells me there's usually more to it than that, right?
You're right. You're right. There often is. While an outright gift is simple, it doesn't always provide the level of control or protection that a more formal trust can offer.
Right.
So, for example, what if your niece is young and you're not sure she's ready to, handle a valuable collection?
Mhm.
Or what if you wanted to make sure that those records stay within the family for generations to come?
Yeah.
That's where the other methods come in.
Okay. All right. You've piqued my interest. What's
Yeah.
the second way?
Okay, so the second way involves formally transferring ownership of the property to trustees.
Okay.
And this is more like carefully handing over the baton in a relay race.
Okay.
These trustees are then legally obligated to manage those assets
Okay.
according to the specific instructions
Got it.
that you lay out in a trust document.
So it's like saying, here's the baton, run with it,
Yeah.
but make sure you follow the race plan.
Yeah.
This sounds like it gives a lot more control, a lot more direction.
Yeah, exactly. And you get to set the ground rules and ensure that the assets are managed according to your wishes.
Right.
Even if you're not around to, personally oversee it.
Okay, this is making a lot more sense now.
Okay, good.
I'm seeing how trusts can be a powerful tool for planning.
Absolutely.
So it's the third way.
Okay, so the third method is where you declare yourself as the trustee.
Okay.
And this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but it's actually a common approach.
Right.
You retain ownership of the property, but you also take on the legal responsibilities of a trustee.
So hold on. So I'm both the owner and the manager.
Yeah.
Isn't that like playing both sides of the chessboard?
In a way, yeah. You're wearing two hats, but with very specific rules to follow.
Okay.
So you're essentially making a legally binding promise to manage those assets
Okay.
for the benefit of someone else according to the terms that you set out.
Mhm.
It's like creating a contract with yourself,
Okay.
but one that have, serious legal implications.
I'm seeing how this could get complicated.
Yeah.
So, our handout, it really emphasizes that just intending to benefit someone isn't enough.
Right.
The law demands concrete action.
Absolutely. That's a crucial point. So you have to go beyond good intentions
Right.
and actually take the necessary legal steps to make it all official. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So we're talking about transferring legal title,
Okay.
the official documented ownership.
Okay.
And this can involve different procedures depending on what kind of asset we're dealing with.
So I can't just write, like on a napkin,
Right.
I hereby give my niece my house.
Right.
Just call it a day.
Not quite.
Okay.
Although I'm sure some interesting legal battles have started that way.
Okay.
The law requires a bit more formality when you're dealing with something like real estate.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, transferring ownership of land requires a deed.
All right.
And that's like a super official receipt
Okay.
that proves that you own it and that you're passing that ownership to someone else.
So handing down like a family heirloom
Yeah.
might be simple.
Yeah.
But giving someone a piece of property,
Right.
different ballgame.
Different story. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Different types of assets have different rules.
Okay.
So giving your niece that vintage record collection might be as simple as handing it to her.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about something like shares in a company, there's a whole other world of forms and registrations to navigate.
Oh, I bet. So creating a trust is all about taking these specific, legally recognized actions.
Absolutely.
And the type of action depends on the specific asset that you're dealing with. This is making me wonder, are there ever situations where the rules are a bit more flexible?
Yeah.
Maybe where the law recognizes the intention,
Right.
even if the exact process wasn't followed to the letter.
That's a great question. And it leads us into some fascinating case law.
Oh, good.
There's this fundamental principle in trust law. It's often phrased as equity will not perfect an imperfect gift.
Okay.
And that kind of sets the stage for how these situations are handled. But as with most things in law, there are nuances.
Of course.
And we'll explore some of those right after this.
So before the break, we were talking about how creating a trust isn't just about good intentions.
Right.
It's about taking specific legal actions.
Absolutely.
And apparently there are some legal gray areas
Yeah.
where things get really interesting.
Yes. Remember that legal principle we mentioned?
Yeah.
Equity will not perfect an imperfect gift.
It does sound a bit like a riddle.
It kind of does, yeah.
So break that down for us a little. What does that actually mean in
Yeah.
practice?
Yeah, so essentially it means that if someone messes up the process of making a gift,
Okay.
the courts won't step in and just fix it for them just because they had good intentions.
Okay.
So let's say you wanted to give your nephew a valuable antique car,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't properly transfer the title before you passed away. Even if everyone knew you wanted him to have it,
Right.
without that legal paperwork, the court might not be able to enforce your wishes.
So even if it's clear what the person wanted, if they didn't dot their I's and cross their T's legally,
Right.
their wishes might not be carried out.
Right.
Seems a bit harsh, doesn't it?
It can, yeah. But there's a reason for this strictness.
Okay.
Imagine the chaos if the courts had to constantly try to interpret people's intentions without clear legal documentation.
Right.
It would create a lot of uncertainty and potential for disputes.
That's a good point. I guess it's like you can't just say you're giving someone a gift.
Right.
You have to actually follow through
Yeah.
with the right actions to make it legally binding.
So are there any exceptions to this equity won't perfect rule?
There are a few interesting exceptions. One case that illustrates this is Ree Rose.
Okay.
It involved someone trying to transfer shares of a company, but the paperwork got delayed.
Okay.
And the court ultimately decided that since the person had done everything they were supposed to do on their end,
Right.
The gift should be considered complete,
Okay.
even though the other party hadn't technically received the shares yet.
so it's like the legal equivalent of, I mailed it, so it's out of my hands.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can see how that might be fair in certain situations. Are there any other examples where this strict rule gets bent a bit?
Yes. Another interesting case is Jaffa v. Taylor Gallery.
Okay.
And this one dealt with a gift of a valuable piece of artwork.
Okay.
And think about it, you can't exactly hand over a giant sculpture the same way you'd hand over a record collection, right?
That's true.
So the court recognized this and took a more pragmatic approach, taking into account the unique nature of the gift.
So sometimes common sense prevails, and the law adapts to the specific circumstances.
Exactly.
It's good to know there's some flexibility built into the system.
Right, and perhaps the most controversial exception is Pennington v. Wayne.
Okay.
And in this case, someone promised to give shares to their nephew, but again, the paperwork wasn't fully completed. However, the nephew had already started making decisions based on the promise, like taking on a new role in the company.
Oh, wow.
And the court ultimately decided that it would be unfair or unconscionable to allow the giver to back out at that point.
Unconscionable. That sounds pretty serious. What does that actually mean in this context?
Yeah, it essentially means it would be so unjust or unethical that it would shock the conscience
No.
to allow it to happen.
Got it.
In this case, the nephew had relied on the promise to his detriment.
Right.
So the court felt it was necessary to intervene and uphold the gift,
Okay.
even though the technical steps hadn't been fully completed.
So it's like if you promise someone an inheritance and they start making major life decisions based on that promise, like quitting their job or investing in something specific,
Yeah.
you might not be able to just change your mind later on.
Exactly. That's a great takeaway from Pennington v. Wayne. It highlights the importance of carefully considering the potential impact of your promises, especially when it comes to significant assets.
Okay, so we've got these exceptions to the equity won't perfect rule.
Right.
Situations where the court might step in even if the legal process wasn't perfectly followed.
Right.
This all seems particularly relevant when we're talking about that third way to create a trust, where you declare yourself as trustee.
Absolutely.
It's like setting up a system where you're promising to manage assets for someone else's benefit.
Yes. And this is where things can get a little tricky because your actions have to really align with your stated intentions.
Right.
It's not enough to just say, I'm holding this property for my son. You have to actually act like a trustee,
Okay.
managing those assets responsibly and in their best interests.
I am sensing a case law example coming on. Give us the juicy details.
You bet. Richards v. Delbridge is a classic cautionary tale.
Okay.
A grandfather wanted to give his business to his grandson, heartwarming sentiment, right?
Yeah.
But instead of setting up a formal trust, he simply wrote a note on the lease of the business premises stating that he was giving it to his grandson.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to create a legally binding trust.
Wait, seriously, why wasn't that considered sufficient?
Well, the court felt that his actions were more in line with an outright gift,
Okay.
which, as we discussed, requires different legal steps. He didn't take those steps, so the court couldn't enforce his wishes. It's a reminder that even with the best of intentions, you need to follow the proper legal procedures to make sure your wishes are carried out.
That's a tough lesson.
Yeah.
I guess it really highlights the importance of getting sound legal advice
Yes.
when you're dealing with something as important as a trust. Don't just try to DIY it.
Absolutely. Having a knowledgeable attorney can help you navigate these complexities and ensure everything is done correctly from the start.
Right.
Remember, we're talking about potentially significant assets and long-term planning here.
Right.
It's worth getting it right.
Okay, so we've covered the three main ways to create a trust, and we've seen how critical it is to take the right legal steps to make it all official.
Right.
We've also learned about some intriguing exceptions where the courts might bend the rules a bit
Yeah.
if fairness demands it.
Right.
But before we wrap things up, I'd love to circle back to this concept of equity will not perfect an imperfect gift.
Okay.
It's been popping up throughout our conversation, and I think it deserves a bit more unpacking.
You're right. It's a fundamental principle in trust law,
Okay.
and it really gets to the heart of how these legal arrangements are designed to work.
So can we dive a little deeper into that after the break?
Sure.
I'm ready to explore the depths of equity
Right.
and how it interacts with the world of trusts. Okay, so we're back, and I'm ready to kind of unravel this whole idea of equity will not perfect an imperfect gift.
Yeah.
It sounds like a legal tongue twister.
Right.
But it feels like a really important concept in this world of trusts.
It absolutely is. Yeah, it's one of those legal principles that might sound a bit intimidating at first,
Right.
but once you understand it,
Yeah.
that actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's demystify it a little bit.
Okay, so remember we've been talking about how creating a trust requires these very specific actions, right, to make it legally binding.
Yeah.
Well, this principle basically reinforces that idea. It's like the law saying, look, we get it. Sometimes people make mistakes, but we can't just go around fixing every imperfect gift or trust just because someone had good intentions.
So it's like the legal system kind of drawing a line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
Intentions matter, but they have to be backed up by the right actions.
Exactly. And that's where equity comes in.
Okay.
It's a separate system of law that developed alongside common law,
Right.
and it's often seen as more flexible, aiming to achieve fairness in situations where the strict application of common law might lead to an unjust outcome.
Okay, so it's like equity is the safety net, right?
Yeah.
Of the legal world.
Yeah.
Stepping in to try to make things right when things go wrong. But you're saying even equity has its limits.
That's right. Even equity has to operate within a framework of principles and precedents.
Yeah.
And this principle, equity will not perfect an imperfect gift,
Right.
is one of its kind of foundational rules.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's essentially setting a boundary, saying that even with the best of intentions, you can't just sidestep the established rules for transferring property or creating a trust.
This is making me think about those cases that we talked about earlier where the courts did kind of bend the rules a little bit,
Right?
like Pennington v. Wayne.
Yeah, you're right to bring that up. Those exceptions are a great example of how equity tries to strike a balance, right?
Yeah.
Between upholding the integrity of legal processes and ensuring fairness in these specific situations. But it's important to remember those are exceptions, not the rule.
It seems like there's this constant tension, right?
Yeah.
Between wanting to honor people's wishes and having a clear,
right.
predictable legal system.
Yeah.
Where do you think that line should be drawn?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one that judges and legal scholars have been debating for centuries.
Right.
There's no easy answer.
Of course not.
And it often comes down to, the specifics, the details of each case. But I think the key is to remember that that the law is constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the static set of rules. It's this, it's a living, breathing system that adapts to changing societal values
Right.
and these new challenges.
So it's like the law is trying to keep up with, the complexities of human relationships and intentions,
Yeah,
while also maintaining this sense of order,
right.
predictability.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It's not just about, memorizing rules. It's about grappling with these fundamental questions about fairness and justice and, the role of the law in our lives.
It really is. And you know what? It's making me think about my own family. We've got some family heirlooms that have been passed down for generations.
Yeah,
And I've always just assumed they'd keep getting passed down.
right.
But now I'm realizing that might not be the case if things aren't done properly from a legal standpoint.
That's a great point. And it highlights why understanding these legal nuances can be so important for everyday people, right? Not just the super wealthy, whether you're dealing with a family heirloom or a small business or a complex estate, having just that basic understanding of trusts and the legal principles involved can empower you to, to make informed decisions and protect your interests.
This has been a real eye-opener for me. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the complexity and the nuance of trusts.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to be having some conversations with my family about how we want to handle these things going forward.
That's fantastic to hear. And that's ultimately what we hope to achieve with these deep dives.
Yeah.
To spark your curiosity, equip you with knowledge,
Right.
and empower you to take action.
I love that. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we sign off?
Just this. Don't be afraid to delve deeper into these topics that pique your interest. Whether it's trusts or wills or any other legal matter, there are resources available to help you learn more and make informed decisions. And if you're dealing with something complex, don't hesitate to seek guidance from a qualified legal professional.
Great advice. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating this legal landscape. To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has been insightful and maybe even a little bit empowering. Remember, even seemingly dry topics like trust formation can reveal these fascinating stories of human intention and legal strategy and, the ongoing quest to balance fairness and predictability in our legal system.
Well said. Keep those legal minds churning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.